Well, welcome everybody to our virtual class. My name is Michelle Diaz, and I'm the Education Program Manager. Trees mission is to plan, protect, and educate about the urban forest. We host classes like this throughout the year in person, and during this time, we're going to be hosting some virtual classes. So check out the website for more information. During this presentation, you are going to have the option to be unmuted, and you can ask questions to the speaker while we are doing the class. There's also a chat tool, and you can type your questions in there. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to be allowing some time for additional questions. But throughout the presentation, I'll be reading the questions for the speaker. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll be posting it into our website. We will love your feedback. You're going to be getting a survey email, and we would love to know how can we improve these presentations and these virtual experiences. And we invite you for our next virtual class that will be Pruning 101 on May 16th. On Saturday, May 16th, that will be from 1 to 2. This is going to be our second pruning class. The first one went very well, and we're very excited to host it again. To learn more about the upcoming virtual classes and then future volunteer opportunities, visit treesatlanta.org and follow us on social media. Our speaker today is Christie Bryant. She is an arborist, president of the Georgia Arborist Association, and she is the president of Speaking for the Trees. We're very excited to have you, Christie. Thank you so much for joining us and spending this Saturday with us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining in. I am going to go to screen share now. Okay. All right, can everybody hear me? Michelle, are we good?
Yes, I see the presentation and I can see you.
Perfect. Okay. So thanks everybody for coming, spending your Saturday learning some about trees. Just a little bit about me. I'm again the president of the Georgia Arborist Association, which is a nonprofit for arborists to come get our CEUs and all of our education. I see we have a couple of arborists on here today, which just makes me a little bit nervous, but you know, this is more geared for homeowners. What I'm trying to do is give you the information that I have to give clients in their yards every day. I live in Grant Park. I live in the neighborhood of mature trees. I absolutely love and respect mature trees and had been begging Trees Atlanta for a while, like, why aren't we teaching about mature trees? So this is my first time being able to do this, and I really appreciate it. The screen that you see right now is actually a great view of the city of Atlanta, and I feel a very important picture for a reason, and that reason is, what do you notice other than the buildings and the beautiful sky is you see that green canopy. And I want you to ask yourself, how many of those trees are mature trees? Probably most of what we see in that picture are what we would consider mature trees. So we have a lot of Atlanta, and in my opinion, we don't do enough to protect it as a resource. There's lots of misinformation, lots of mistakes made every day, and I try to get out and educate as often as I can. So this is just a review of why we need mature trees. If you're taking this class today, you probably know most of these, but it's always something good to point out and remind people is exactly what they give us. I tell people in their yards all the time, listen, I understand it's a risk, but so's driving. And I promise you that that tree is giving you more than it's taking, short of it being in the middle of your house. And I've had to deal with plenty of those in my career. But moving on, that's why we need mature trees. So you can read this slide for yourself. I just felt like if we were going to talk about mature trees in and of themselves, I needed to give you a definition of that. And basically that means that they have reached a mature age and a mature size, and their needs have changed a little bit over time. They've changed the way that they take wind dynamics. They changed the way that they photosynthesize. Research is showing they sequester more carbon than young trees, even by volume, and leaves and all that. So they're super, super, super important to the environment, in my opinion, way more important than the younger trees. So this is just an example of the life cycle of a tree. Obviously, we know all of this stuff. Again, we know the life cycle of the tree. The right one is the heartwood and xylem and cambium and phloem. That's just kind of showing how trees grow in diameter. And then I've got another slide to go a little bit more into that in a minute. So I figured that people that are taking this class probably remember photosynthesis, but I feel like, maybe it's always a good time to review. Trees' job is to get green into sunshine. And when our leaves aren't looking right, that's one of the things that indicates to an arborist immediately that we may have a problem. So just, leaves grow trees. All the good stuff comes from there, from the leaves.
Listen, can I call you back? I'm just in the middle of a little bit of.
So this is the root system of a mature tree. These roots are a little bit deeper than we actually have in the Atlanta area. We have very high clay content soil. The trees just simply don't need a reason to put their roots down there. It's hard to get roots down there, so they really don't. So normally, all of our root systems in Atlanta are in the top 6 to 8 inches of soil, which is a very important fact that most people don't understand. And that's pretty much because all pictures of trees misrepresent the root system of a tree. They show this big, huge, deep root system, almost the size of the canopy, and that is not the reality. And it's very important that people understand that difference. This is probably somewhere in middle Georgia, probably in loomier soil, so that the roots could get a little bit deeper. But that's the basic root structure of a tree. So this, for all you nerdy scientists out there, this isn't exactly scientifically correct, but I felt like it was good enough for you to get a good idea. The biggest thing I want you to take for this is what the roots do, what the soil does, what the outer bark does. What the leaves are doing, and most importantly, what the heartwood is doing. If you notice, it says inactive cells, and it adds structural support. That becomes very, very important when we talk about proper pruning in mature trees. So just kind of snapshot this in your brain, because it's going to be important throughout the presentation. So the biggest thing that I deal with as an arborist is trying to explain to homeowners the difference between health and structure of a tree. We can oftentimes fix health issues as arborists. Sometimes we can do things with structural issues, but most of the time when we have a structural issue, we're just kind of biding our time and trying to kind of put the tree in hospice and try to mitigate the harm it can do, try to kind of put him into the final years of his life, until he just becomes so bad that he has to be removed because he can hurt something else. So health refers to the leaves and the feeder roots of a tree. Structure refers to basically everything else: the trunk, the branches, the twigs, the root flare, and most importantly, the big structure roots of a tree. And this is if you look, the green is associated with health, and structure is in black. So when a tree becomes wounded, their defense system is something we refer to as coated. I'm not going to go deep into it, but if you look at the picture on the left, if you look at the black lines and you see that triangular area, that is actually the decay. And the black lines around it are the fungus actually fighting the chemical reaction of a tree. That's the wall of defense that the tree has to defend itself from decay. The final portion of that wall, the final portion of the process is actually growing the wood across it, the wound wood that grows across it. So the picture on the right is one, the wound was so big that the tree just, it was trying to grow the wood. It was trying to grow the wood, but it was too much. And I thought this was a really cool picture because if you look at the top of that triangle, that's actually what we call adventitious roots. The tree's just like, well, I don't know what to do, so let me just put some roots here and just see what happens. It's pretty funny how they react to stuff sometimes. So these are some structure issues that we see in trees. The bottom left is obviously a big hollow. I think he was about 56 inches in diameter, a southern red oak. He was so hollow that I was able to climb in there. And what you can't see is that I could have gone all the way in, and I was actually shaking my legs back and forth about 2 feet inside of that tree. That tree had about 3 targets. And in this situation, it was a sidewalk and 2 houses, that it was inside of the drip line. So this tree had to be removed. He was in Garden Hills in Atlanta, and he had to be removed. If you look at the top left one up here, you can see this area of decay. Now that is the root flare and the beginning of the structure root of the tree. So that takes a lot of the wind. So obviously that's a major issue in a tree. We never want to see decay in a tree, but we really don't want to see it down at the base. This is a tree that I walked up on that was actually cracked. And that's because of included bark. We'll talk more about included bark later. We actually have someone's tree that has an example of that. This tree is after Irma. What I'm not showing you is that he had another tree of equal size in his canopy. So, and both of them leaned out over a 2-story house, and somehow my crew at the time was able to get all of that down without causing any more damage and get both of those trees out. But whenever you're talking about leaning trees after a storm and you think maybe it's a new lean, the indication is to go behind it, and you'll see these earthquake-like caverns, crevices behind the tree, and that's going to indicate that the structural root plate is actually giving up and that the tree's about to come down. This is a tree coming apart because of included bark. Again, that's something we'll talk about. It's something that's very common, and it's something we'll talk about more. Does anybody have any questions so far?
No questions through the chat right now.
Okay. So let's talk about, as we're walking around our neighborhood and we're looking at things that would cause us to call an arborist, or to maybe even just call the city for a permit if you have permitting where you live, are going to be these. These are major indicators that we need to do something with the tree. 1 or 2 of these isn't going to be fatal, but it needs that means that the tree is going to need to be on a monitoring regimen. You're going to need to, have him checked out, probably going to do some pruning and that kind of stuff. But the top left up here, this is Ganoderma. You'll see this on the trunk and or the root flare. And by the root flare, I mean where the bottom of the tree hits the dirt and widens out. That's what we call a root flare. This one down here is the worst, in my opinion, the worst. This is armillaria. The scary part about armillaria is that these mushrooms, they get big, they turn black, and they disappear. So if you're not paying attention, you don't know that your tree has these, and this is the most aggressive of the 3 root rots that we normally see in Atlanta. This is the most aggressive, and it's the scariest because these mushrooms disappear. So it's important that you're out in your yard looking at your trees all the time so that you know what they look like in all the seasons, and you can find these things when they happen. The way that we find this, once we see it, or we think that we may have it, or we find the little black mushrooms near the tree, is that we would look up under the bark, and they would actually have a dark black shoestring-like fungus that happens under the bark, and that's an indication of armillaria when there isn't evidence of the mushrooms. This is called Inonotus. I see this everywhere in Atlanta all of the time. And then sadly, there's nothing we can do about any one of these. This one in the center, the graying color on the bark, that's a fatal one that hits oaks in Atlanta commonly, and this is called hypoxylon canker. The problem with hypoxylin canker is it actually sinks into the bark and it takes all the lignin out of the cellulose out of the tree, which leaves the lignin, which leaves it very, very brittle and very dangerous for the tree people to remove. So when you see the first indications of this, if it's in one branch, you can try to remove that branch. Research is showing that it doesn't stop it, but at least could get by you a couple more years with the tree. But once you see this and really eating into the canopy, please get the trees removed as soon as possible. This industry is dangerous enough for these tree climbers without having to take out trees like this that should have been done way before they had to be removed. This is a common one, the one on the right. This is fusiform canker in pines. This is one of those interesting things where the disease lives in the leaves of oaks nearby and shows up as in the oak leaves as little dots, and you don't really know what they are, and it doesn't really affect the tree. But if you come in here and you look at pines in the early spring, this will kind of be orange with the fusiform. The tree can't deal with it. It can't compartmentalize it off. So it just continues to get deeper and deeper. In the city of Atlanta, for example, they allow removal when the canker gets to be about 25% of the diameter of the trunk where the wound is, where the canker is. So those are some of the structure issues that we deal with in trees. Sorry. Now we're going to talk about some health issues that we see. The biggest one, the most common one, is what's as simple as it can be. We call it tip dieback. So again, a tree's job, going back into photosynthesis, is to get its green into sunshine. So it's an indicator to us as arborists when we look at a tree and we see that the tops and the tip don't have leaves. And then if we look at the trunk, further down the trunk, all these dormant buds are igniting, they're firing out branches, and they're doing it in the shade. So it's sapping energy from the tree. It's not giving the tree any energy. It's having to, do all this energy. Now, when a tree has been heavily pruned because of power line pruning, or because maybe it was damaged in a storm and it lost a lot of its leaf surface, it is normal to see these at the wounds, and that's okay. We always removed them. My thinking is the tree knows what it's doing. It's putting these out on purpose. So let's leave them until they get big enough to become dangerous and let them do. Because in my opinion, they're applying sugar straight to that wound and helping that tree compartmentalize it off easier. But in a tree that's in decline, this is a huge indicator of decline in health. Another way that we look at the leaves is we look at change in color, change in size. A lot of times when a tree's declining, it just doesn't, I guess, have the energy to make the leaves big enough. So there'll be small colors changes. When we have bad insect infestations, which I don't go into insects in this presentation because honestly, what I deal with in mature trees is very rarely insect infestations. Or if they are, it's secondary. It's secondary to the fact that the tree's in decline and can't fight off the insects. So I don't even go into insects.
Hey, Christy.
Do see commonly.
Okay. We lost you for a little bit after the insects.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
I think I was pretty much done after the insects. But that's just one of the things that we look for. Is any discoloration in leaves. It's very rare that we do get insect infestations in large trees, and if we do, it's secondary. It's a symptom of the problem. It's not the problem. Now, these insects do cause some damage to trees. It is very rarely fatal, but I get a lot of calls and questions about these, and these are galls. So these are insects that overwinter under trees. The mama goes up as the leaves are emerging in the spring, and she lays her eggs inside of the leaves. The leaf then becomes a protectant for the egg. Then the baby is born, and obviously the leaf is very damaged. You can see the trees that we see this most. Jumping oak gall affects white oaks. It runs on a 3 to 4 year cycle. We haven't seen them since 2014. It can and will kill mature white oaks simply because the tree defoliates right after it just put out leaves. And if it's old enough and it doesn't have those young tree energy reserves, it just doesn't have the ability to put out more leaves. And then a secondary insect, usually a boring beetle, comes in and kills off the tree. So I have seen a lot of tree death in white oaks in Atlanta due to jumping oak gall, but it's been 4 years, so I'm expecting a recycle, maybe even this season. So be on the lookout for the bottom right. And again, that only attacks white oaks. Then we have pecan and hickory leaf gall. I have about a 43-inch pecan that I live under. It's attacked my truck with branches. It gets this every year. It loses all of its leaves in June. I have about 4 falls out of this tree. It is the messiest, most miserable tree in the world, but yet I cannot imagine my life without this tree in it. So they are a pain, but they're with the pecans and the hickories, they're very rarely fatal, but you'll see this. Southern red oaks have a couple, but these are the most common that I see out in the field. So trees are meant to be part of a forest. In my opinion, that's one of the major reasons that oak trees have such a hard, that trees in the urban environment have such a hard time, is because we plant trees singly. That's even required in most municipalities, is that they go out, they take out all the trees, they grade it, they take away all the good soil, then they throw a single tree in the front yard. And then they sod up 3 feet up to it, and it's just simply not manageable, and the trees have a hard time because of it. There is now evidence that they communicate through a mycorrhizal network, and all of the things, the leaf litter, the critters that put the oxygen in the soil, all of those things work together to make mycorrhizae and to make this communication possible, and it just doesn't happen in an urban environment.
Christy, we have a question.
Okay.
How, if possible, do arborists treat leaf galls?
Great question. There is actually nothing that we can do. When we had jumping oak gall hitting the white oaks back in 2014, Rainbow Tree Care and myself and a very respected arborist, Pat Mulweeney, that owns Prestige Tree and Shrub, or actually he retired now, we went out and did some experiments. The problem is the way that we can kill insects in trees is with contact insecticides or with systemic insecticides. Well, the problem is these babies don't eat the leaves. They just are inside of a shell. They're inside of an egg, and they just, as the egg hatches, they don't really chew their way out. So there's no way to kill them. So there's really nothing that we can do for them at all. We can, as we can do with anything, and you'll hear me say this 1,000 times, we can get our trees as healthy as possible so that the trees can deal with the effects of having to lose all their leaves, but there's nothing that we can do to deal with those insects. So did that answer that correctly?
Yes, I think so.
All right. Going back to the soils, the most important part of the tree is actually the roots. As we discussed, the roots are only in the top 6 to 8 inches of the soil. And the big roots that you see that everybody talks about and worries about aren't the important one when it comes to tree health. It's the small roots. They're they're somewhere between the diameter of a single piece of pine straw and a human hair, and they're about as strong. And if they're not growing, they're dying. So when we get compacted soils, when we all go out to the Dogwood Festival and we all sit up under the oak trees because it runs up to 85 degrees that day because it's springtime in Atlanta and that's what happens, and we all sit our butts down there and we're compacting the crap out of that soil, we are taking away that tree's ability to do anything. We're taking away those tree roots' ability to take in oxygen and nutrients and water, and we're taking away their ability to store energy. So soil compaction is horrible. Dr. Coder, one of the most respected arborists in the industry from University of Georgia, says that 85% of urban soils are compacted. When we do construction, when we go out the way that we construct houses now, actually takes that B or C horizon of soil, flips it up over the A horizon and the O horizon, and that's what trees end up getting planted in. There's an abundance of ammonia, trees, which is, guess what? Ammonia is not good for trees. There's nothing natural for them there. It compacts badly. It's horrible. This is why you will never see a healthy parking lot tree. It's because they, the builders don't want to pay to take in soil or take out soil. So their goal is to just flatten the space and use the soil that they have on site. So that's what they get planted in, is that subsoil and that substratosphere. So obviously it's a bad start to life for trees. The best thing to do is to, if you're going to do a subdivision, you're going to do it, is to plant trees in groups and try to leave that as virgin soil and or amend it with good soil. And the whole area, not just the pocket where the tree's going to go, that whole area needs to be amended and the trees planted in that. So let's talk about soil testing. People ask me all the time, what can I do for my big tree to make him healthier and happier? Well, the first thing we can do is find out what he's growing in, what's he dealing with. Is the soil compacted? When you go out during a rain, is the water just running off of it because the soil is so compacted it's basically concrete? When is the last time you had a soil test to see what nutrients are available, and most importantly, what the pH of the soil is? If you look at this chart on the right, the green is where plants can absorb nutrients. So what this means is it does not matter what nutrients are available to the tree. The pH matters and the ability for it to take it up. Now, each plant's going to have a little bit different pH need. Most plants in the Piedmont want between 5.5 to 6.5 pH. We like a high acid soil here, probably to do with the clays. Somebody more soil informed could probably teach you more about that. But so when we see nutrient deficiencies in trees, the first question is not is a nutrient available, but can the tree use it if it is? So when it comes to fertilization, it doesn't matter what you put down. It matters what your pH is. So everybody run out today, call your extension agent, or Google how to do a soil test and go do a soil test on your trees and see where you are. You may need to make some adaptations. Just remember, too, the pH scale is exponential. It's very hard to correct the pH, and it's very time-consuming to do so. Going back to soils, I think that on the right, I think that says a lot. Another thing about mycorrhizae is a lot of what we're seeing in the left-hand picture under healthy soil is a lot of that is the actual microbial network. So mycorrhizae has a symbolic relationship with tree roots. They're using some of the carbohydrates that those tree roots are storing, and to repay that tree for that, they're going out and they're putting out their own roots, which are drawing in nutrients and water and helping the tree extend its root network. You've probably all seen this. If you haven't, go out today and pull back some layers of leaves and you'll see these. Some of the mushrooms we eat are actually mycorrhizal mushrooms. Chanterelles, I think, or mycorrhizae. But super important. And all of this happens under that natural forest that we leave our trees with, leaving the original leaves from the trees. What a beautiful way for nature to take care of her trees. It provides the nutrients she needs. It holds in the moisture. It keeps down weeds and competing plants. It creates a great place for the babies to grow up and continue on life. It's, very important that we imitate the forest as much as we possibly can to get healthy trees. So common mistakes in trees. See that beautiful tree? See all those beautiful plants, those hostas and was those stilby under that tree? As arborists, we hate to see that. Nothing is more frustrating for me as an arborist to protect a tree during construction when a shopping center or a house is being built, and then I go by it 3 weeks later and the landscape has tilled up to the trunk and laid sod. He just killed everything I did. We don't till through we don't till through those roots because they're baby little hair-like, so you've just destroyed the feeder root system of the tree. But you're planting, which is also competing with, don't do it. there is something beautiful about just the negative space of mulch to be under a tree. We don't have to plant every single space in a landscape. It's not natural. It's not how nature does it. It's not how we need to imitate it. Picture on the right is a couple of problems. A, that's incorrect pruning. A tree should never be pruned where it's ripping its own bark. And B, we're exposing the heartwood. So when we talked about the slide at the beginning, remember how I said that heartwood is important because it is now structural wood only. It does not have those chemical defenses that the sapwood and the cambial layer has. So it can't defend itself against decay. So you prune away. Often when you remove a large branch, you remove too much leaf surface. So you're kind of going to starve the tree. And B, you're cutting into that undefendable wood. We can go out. Things that we can do is the only reason I should see a large branch removed from a tree is if that tree has been knocked out or cracked during a storm. That's the only excuse. I get people all the time, well, my neighbor was afraid it was going to hit their house. Well, there's other things we can do about that to make them feel more safe with that branch than to just remove that branch from that tree. And by large branch, I'm talking about branches that are more than 25% of the diameter of the trunk where the union is. This tree has been pruned way too heavy, and this tree, the tree is not going to be able to defend these wounds, and this is where decay sets in. We remove too many leaves at a time. We never want to remove 20% of any tree in a growing season, and with mature trees, I try to keep that 10 to 15%. We'll get into branch collars and if we prune too deep or leave stubs, and then improper pruning. This is one of the most common mistakes I see in arboriculture is the tree guy's out there, he has the best of intentions, but he's not educated. He's not taking CEU classes. He doesn't understand that what he did by pruning this tree on the bottom is making it more susceptible to breakage because he's just changed the wind dynamic and the tree just look at that from physics. It's obvious what can happen. So then let's talk about what we do to kill trees. The picture on the right, these people paid us. This is in a big apartment complex in Gwinnett County that's being built. They paid me to come in and monitor this site. They paid me to come in and put lightning protection in these trees, prune these trees. We had layers of mulch put under them to protect them during construction. I came in to do my monthly monitoring visit, and this is what I found. One of the contractors has moved the orange tree safe fence up against the trunk of the tree and has dug down directly next to the tree. That is 3 foot out from the trunk of that tree. So now they had to remove the trees because the contractor decided he could just move that tree safe fence because he needed his machine to go up there. They lost, I think, about $5,000 in investment of that trees plus the removal of those trees. This is tree safe fencing. This is where this is the limit of impact to that tree. This is us tagging the trees behind it because they're so close that they're going to be damaged. So we're tagging the removal of those trees because even though they're inside of this tree save area, too much of the critical root zone is being impacted. Down here, oh, just build a wall. The tree will be fine, right? Until it's not. And I've seen this so many times. It's so common. The tree survives the impact by some miracle, and then the next wind takes it out. Okay, proper pruning, going back. So when we leave stubs and we cut them too far out, what happens is the tree can't compartmentalize. It's holding the first 3 walls, but it's not being able to grow the wood out. It's not able to close off the wound because this stub is left out here. The second problem with this is the things that are decaying this stub are the same funguses that are now being introduced into the tree and can easily move into this heartwood that again is undefendable and can cause problems with the tree, cause decay later. These things take a while to kill a tree, but oftentimes we remove, especially big water oaks in Atlanta, have to be removed because somebody didn't prune it right. They took too big of wood. They left stubs for too long. Post oaks are very common when they self-prune. They do a horrible job of letting that final stub go. And you'll walk up to a post oak and see a 6-inch growth out here, and there's still like a 12-inch stick sticking out of it. I mean, it's ridiculous how long they'll try to hold on to that wood. This is where we pruned it too far in, and we cut past the hormones that produce that. Trees grow on hormones, and what makes this compartmentalization process start is these hormones that live in this bark ridge or this branch collar are ignited because the tree is pruned. So when we cut into this, we cut past those hormones, and this tree can never seal off that portion of that wound. It can't grow the wound wood. So then we get decay. It's a common mistake. Tree guys make it all the time. Sometimes even good tree guys make a wrong cut, saw moves, they do flush cuts, but the goal is for that never to happen. Also, for you guys that are going to go outside today and plant some young trees and do some pruning on those, it's important that you do the 3-cut method, because if you just come in here and you just cut straight down, you're going to end up ripping the tree like that guy. So the way to prevent this is to do a cut above, a cut halfway above, halfway below, and then the final cut back at the branch. First cut, second cut, third cut.
Christie, we have a question here about pruning. The question is, can you correct a bad cut like the one picture here with tar or other material?
Absolutely not. So trees are primarily water, not primarily, but they have a lot of water in them. And we learned back in the 80s that tar is bad because A, it inhibits the tree's natural reaction and its ability to defend its own wounds. And it also actually holds in moisture, which only causes decay to become worse. So no tar ever. There's no way to correct a flush cut. Get the tree as healthy as possible and hope it can defend the wound. Maybe the wound wood would close all the way across it before the decay sets in. So let's talk about what we can do to avoid large branch removal. Every other year in Atlanta, the pecan trees have a lot of weight on them because they're making pecans, and we have a lot of damage and a lot of complaints. I want my pecan tree removed as it's attacked my house for the last time. The city of Atlanta comes out and says, no, ma'am, you are not removing your tree because it can be mitigated. The damage from this can be mitigated. And the way that we can mitigate that is to walk all the way out to the end of that big old branch and remove 2 small 2 to 3 inch branches off the tip of it. It's called canopy or tip reduction, weight reduction. And it's just physics. It's just removing the weight off the end of the branch so the branch has less of a lever effect and has less chance of failing. So that's a little bit of a difference. But again, before you let anybody prune your trees, the first question needs to be, why am I pruning this tree? What is my goal, and does it really need to even happen? I can't tell you how many clients call me and they just want to spend money on their tree. And I'm like, dude, you know we're not spending money on your tree. It's fine. It doesn't need anything. So what can we do when we have issues in trees? Well, cabling and bracing. I've cabled a lot of pecan trees because they do tend to do that lever thing, and there are overhouses and they do have a lot of targets, and cabling can be a good support. If we have a huge high value tree and he's one of the tallest trees around, we want to put lightning protection in him. We can do air spading to deal with soil compaction. We can do vertical mulching, which is like, it's kind of like removing the compacted soil and putting in good soil in an area around a tree. We can do insecticide treatments. One of my favorites, one of the newer tools in the toolbox is plant growth regulators. Mature trees, we don't need them to grow. We don't really want them to grow in cambium. A lot of times they're beside a house and they're growing up against gutters and stuff, especially in Grant and Emmon Park. So we're trying to reduce that cambial growth. Plant growth regulators are a great way to do that, and we're going to go into that in a case study in a few minutes. For some from bacterial leaf scorch and some bacterial leaf diseases, we can do antibiotics. We can do soil injections of fertilizers. We can soil test. There's a lot that we can do. We have a lot of tools in our toolbox to deal with mature trees now. So what can we do? Mulch. Again, if we can imitate the forest, we can have healthy trees. So we want to do mulch. I like it to match the tree. If we're going to be in a bed of pines, let's do some pine straw. Leave what they have. Quit taking away the leaves. Blow them out in the grass, mulch them up in the fall, throw them back in the beds, and then put some pretty hardwood mulch on top of it. Again, leaves, it's the perfect food for trees. That's why they're fed that. Remember the roots. They are half the tree, and they are the most important half of the tree. Plant trees correctly, put them in the right place. I'm so tired of people getting mad at Georgia Power because they planted their grandma's maple tree under a power line. That's not, plant the right trees in the right place. If you have mature trees, have a relationship with an arborist. It's very important that because we see them change over time, and we need to. A new arborist every 3 years isn't doing you any good. They're having to learn the tree again. And trust me, if it's an awesome tree, we'll remember your tree. Know your trees. Take photos of your property, get to know what you have. When you do have your first arborist visit, have out a pen and paper, take notes, know what trees you have, know some of the common issues, know what to look for. We're happy to give you this information. And then again, it's in the soil. If we preserve the land and the trees, the natural systems, it all starts in the dirt. And then there's some really good links down there that you can use. So
we have 2 questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. The first one is, I have seen a very large limb that fell from a tree, and the owner sealed up the damage on the tree itself with some kind of orange foam. Is there a foam that is okay for sealing off a badly damaged tree, or was this a very misguided fix?
Okay, so that was probably a misguided fix. Their goal was to try to keep water out of the wound, is my guess. Again, that just kind of traps the water in the soil. Now, I have used orange foam one time on one tree. That was a champion white oak in Grant Park, 60-inch white oak, amazing tree. It had a little area where it had not been able to compartmentalize a branch that had come off of it years ago. And we decided we needed to keep the water out of it. So we did use a little bit of foam in that wound only. And that is the only time I have used it. And that was a very special tree. It was just a very special, it was a one-time thing. But no, normally don't do anything. The trees, there are trees on this earth that have survived ice ages. Give them a chance to deal with it on their own.
Okay, and then the second question, where there's 2 more here. So how thick should mulch be under a mature tree?
I like from 2 to 4 inches. And as much of the drip line as you can possibly do. That means from branch tip to branch tip, the crown of the tree.
And then what should a typical initial arborist visit cost to assess a tree?
The average around Atlanta right now is about $125 for a consulting arborist visit. With my visits, if I find work that needs to be done, I mark the trees and I'll send out 2 different companies depending on what area of town I'm in to come out and provide an estimate for that same cost. So that way you're actually looking apples to apples.
Okay, thank you.
Was there another one?
That was it.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So this was an example that was sent in from somebody attending the class today. That is a very large poplar. And what we have here in between where these 2 trunks come together is called included bark. So what happens to trees is there are some species that are more prone to it. You see a lot of sweet gums doing the double trunk thing in the forest, but because they can be greedy and they can get all this sunlight, sometimes they tend to, and I feel like they put out way more leaves than they should, and anyway, stuff like that. But what happens is this trunk and this trunk they start competing with each other to be the big trunk. They want to be the central leader of the tree. So what happens is they are growing independent of each other. So as we've learned, trees grow in cambial diameter every year. So what they're doing is they're putting pressure against each other. And then this is the tree's response to it. The tree's like, oh gosh, I'm being ripped apart. What do I do? Well, I'm going to put up all this wood and I'm going to try to grow around. I'm going to try to keep myself together. If the tree has a target and a tree has this much wound wood, pretty much the city of Atlanta would probably approve that. I'm assuming that there's a house about right here. There's no way to move a house. So what we look at when we look at trees is, can we mitigate the harm that they do? One way to mitigate this would be, we could cable this and support it. We could take some weight off of the side by doing a couple of pruning cuts on the either side to kind of take away the weight pulling against the tree. I wouldn't be terribly concerned about this tree. Again, I haven't seen the target. All I've seen are the pictures, is because it looks like it's pretty protected. It's surrounded by forest behind it. It's grown up with that forest. It's probably stayed together because of that forest. My concern would be if somebody decided to come back there and build an apartment complex, and all of a sudden this guy is getting winds he's never gotten before. That's when I would be concerned. But without seeing this tree, my first thing would be, hey, can we go up here? Can we cable this tree? Can we do a little weight reduction on either side? And also, what is the homeowner's tolerance of risk? People are a lot more tolerant of trees risk until they have a newborn baby living under it. Then all of a sudden their tolerance reduces, and now they're willing to get rid of that tree. So what I would do here again was do a site visit and get a good look at the targets, assess the homeowner's risk, and then see if we could do whatever we could to try to keep this tree. That's what I would do there. So this is Megan's tree. Megan's a viewer here. So she's a neighbor of mine. This is in Grant Park. This is a huge white oak. I think it was about 40 inches. I haven't visited her in 3 years. She's due for her visit. Megan and I have been communicating about this before this class even came up. So this is a really good example to use. This tree has a very healthy, very vigorous crown. As you can see, this is the front view. This is the view from the neighbor's back deck. It is built into her porch, or maybe it's right beside the porch. She's been instructed to leave her leaf litter, which I see she's doing. Yay, Megan. But when I first met this girl 3 years ago, the first thing I noticed when I walked under the deck was that we had a couple indications of root decay mushrooms. This specific one is Inonotus. Research shows that Inonotus starts at the root tips of the structure roots, decays from the bottom up, moving in toward the trunk, and that by the time we see these mushrooms, there's been some decay done. It is impossible for arborists to determine the extent of root decay, especially with Inonotus, because again, they're decaying from the bottom up. B, how are we supposed to know what structure roots were there? And so we don't know what we're missing. So what we do is first is we assess the risk. How much are you willing to risk this tree? How extensive is the decay? If we're knocking around on the bottom and all around this root flare, do we hear any decay? What do we think the extent is? And then the next thing we do is, what I do is I slow down the growth with plant growth regulators, and then we kind of reduce the crown, because if we can reduce the wind's effect on the tree, right? Why does a sailboat sail? Because the wind catches the sail. If we can thin it a little bit, we can reduce that sail. We can reduce the weight on the top of the tree. Again, they're just physics. We can keep this tree around a lot longer. This has good vigor. I really believe that this tree is fighting off this root decay on its own, and there was just absolutely no reason to look at removal at the time. And I haven't seen the tree, and I'm going to see the tree next week. But right now, I still don't see any reason to remove. So let's do some applied knowledge. Anybody jump in and answer? Michelle can deal with it. So applying what we learned today, name 2 reasons it is so important to limit pruning in mature trees. Pruning in general. Why do we want to limit it? Somebody's going to jump in.
And you can answer, you can unmute yourself to answer, and you can also answer through the chat.
Everybody's going to be shy. Okay. I wouldn't let you be shy if we were in class.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
This is Megan, and thanks for the good news about our tree.
Yeah.
A reason to limit pruning in mature trees is because of wounds that wouldn't heal and could cause damage.
Correct. And another one would be?
Sorry, that's our cat. Not sure.
So think about the leaves. What are we doing when we prune?
Putting enough energy. If you take too many away, the tree's not gonna be able to feed itself.
Exactly. That's it. So we don't want to create a bunch of wounds in an old man, right? So let's think about mature trees as 90-year-old men. Do we want to go in and do surgery on a 90-year-old man? Probably not. And we certainly don't want to remove any of his ability to get energy so that he can defend any wounds. So that's why leaves grow trees. So we don't want to remove too many leaves unless we have a reason. You always need a reason to prune. Okay, second question. Name 2 signs that a mature tree may need to be removed.
If there's some sort of fungus attached to it.
Correct. One more.
The trunk is split.
Very good. Correct. Split trunk, cracks, mushrooms, decays, large broken branches, the top breaks out of a tree. Those would all be signs that a mature tree would need to be removed. So tell me, health-wise, what is a common sign of decline in a mature tree?
The crown doesn't look very good.
Correct. Right. Anything that doesn't look normal in the crown of the tree. This is another reason why I want everybody to go out and take pictures of their trees so that you're going to know what they look like when they're healthy. Save them on a hard drive. Don't just leave them on your phone to be lost. Save them somewhere special, because after a hurricane comes through, you're going to be like, oh no, your neighbor's tree just goes through their house. You're going to see leaning that you've never seen before. And the best way to know is to be able to go back to those pictures and pull those pictures. If you think your tree leaves are yellow this year, go back to last year's or 2 years ago and look at the leaves and how they looked then. So it's very, another reason to go take pictures of your trees. But tip dieback, epicormic growth, the sprouts in the shade, those are all signs of decline in a mature tree. So talking about the heartwood, why is large branch removal such a bad thing?
Because the heartwood can't repair itself.
Correct. It can't defend or repair itself. Correct. Mm-hmm. And why is lightning protection so important for large trees, for tall trees? Well, because lightning strikes are almost always fatal in a mature tree. And the only way to prevent it, especially if they're the tallest guy around, is to put in lightning protection.
If you have a house which is grounded, as you would say, I think you use another expression, but you've had the rod put down the soil, and you have about 25 feet away a large tall oak, would it be a good idea to have the
I'm having a hard time. You sound very muffled. Maybe could you try to type it, maybe?
Well, yes.
Okay, no, I can hear you much better now. Go ahead.
It's a good idea if you have a tall tree, and even though 22, 25 feet away from where the house is grounded, with a copper wire into the ground, it is still a good idea to have that tree protected against lightning.
Yeah. And I mean, you're going to have it installed by an arborist. So, I would say call an arborist that's affiliated with a very reputable tree company and have them come out there and they would assess it. But we do have to run the ground line out about 14 feet, depending on the diameter and how many terminals we're using. We have to go about 14 feet away from the tree with the ground wire and the ground rod. So, as long as they could run it the other way, I think that would probably be fine. But again, you're going to have it installed by an arborist. So just call one.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions about lightning protection? Okay, so why is deadwood removal so important in mature trees? Nobody?
Safety for one reason.
Safety for one reason, but talking about the structure of the tree, it's because the fungus that is breaking them down can move into the heartwood, which is undefendable. And the tree has to grow that wood all the way out until that branch is gone to deal with the decay. So it's taking all this energy and it's having to grow all this wood out just to deal with a dead branch. So that's the major reason why. So that's the end. Does anybody have any other questions?
I see a question on the chat. Are vines covering the trunk of a tree ever something to worry about?
Always something to worry about for a couple of reasons. Vines, the weight of the vine alone is enough to make a tree fail, come down in a storm. A. B. How am I supposed to know if there is decay? If we have a crack in the tree, how am I supposed to know what's going on with the tree if I can't see the trunk of the tree? So I can't even make an accurate assessment of a tree when it's covered in vines. Horrible, horrible, horrible thing is trees and vines. And I should have put a slide in about that. I thought about it when I was driving yesterday and I totally forgot about it. So thank you for bringing that up. Vines are horrible. Don't worry about getting up in the tree and killing them. Cut them at the base, keep them cut at the base, and that's enough for me.
From Susan, non-native vines are typically the problem. And some native vines like cross vine and climbing hydrangeas, they won't cover the trunk.
Correct. But everybody else does. Wisteria will actually pull a tree down. I've seen it happen so many times. English ivy is the enemy. I can't tell you how many healthy trees with no signs of decay I've seen come down in storms because they were weighted down with English ivy or wisteria specifically.
And I see a comment here that poison ivy and Virginia creeper, they are native vines, so it's a different classification.
Yeah, but nobody wants, trust me, your tree climber doesn't want to deal with poison ivy or vines, period. You're going to pay more if you have tree work done when the tree climber has to deal with vines. So just let vines be somewhere else. Don't put them on your trees. Climbing hydrangea is one of my favorite plants. It looks great on a wall, but I'm not going to put it on my tree.
Okay.
I have a quick comment.
Okay.
So the tree that, this is Megan, and the tree that you showed that was over our house, that big white oak, was covered in ivy, English ivy at some point in its life. When we got the house, it clearly been cut away, but the vines are probably as thick around as like my arm. I mean, that tree must have been covered for years, but they had been cut all the way around so that the vines died, and so now they're falling down in pieces. But I just wanted to say, because we noticed this on another tree, I think our whole backyard was covered in vines. It looked like someone had taken a chainsaw to a different tree to cut the vines and had cut into the tree bark itself. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, to caution.
So, I mean, I would prefer the bark never be damaged. The bark is the skin of the tree. We don't want to cut ourselves. But you know, I'd rather a little cut here and there and the tree have to deal with that than having to deal with vines and all the problems they can cause. So, you know, be as careful as you possibly can be. You can cut them right at the base of the tree, even into the dirt, not even have to touch the tree. But, you know, I've very rarely seen anybody butcher a tree getting vines off. So I'm just like, get the vines off. Just cut them at the base and let them die. Just, you know, just kill them. Once they're dead, the weight is leaving, they're dying. I can start seeing through them within 3 months. Even the thickest English ivy, once it's dead, I can see through enough to do an accurate assessment of a tree within 3 months.
Here's a question about, so what trees can be planted understory now to be overstory in the mature, if the mature tree die?
So, okay, you have an overstory tree, like you have an oak tree and you think it's dying and you want to plant something to take its place and you want it to be a smaller tree. Is that correct?
Hi, I submitted the question. Yeah, we have a couple of trees that kind of look like they're starting to die back. I was just wondering, you know, instead of waiting until a tree potentially dies, if there's space to put in other younger trees now that can kind of step into that place within the canopy.
Oh, I
Um,
suggest that all the time to people.
Okay. And just,
It's
do you
gonna cost you
suggest
a little
sticking with
more
the
in tree
same species
removal.
or no?
I'm fine, whatever. I mean, again, if the space is already too, if the space is too small for the existing trees that are there, then go smaller tree, not even understory, but even smaller tree. Or, you know, but if they're fine there, if you've got a big water oak and it's fine in the space, I wouldn't suggest replacing a water oak, but I would go with, you know, a swamp white oak, an improved cultivar that's going to be a big tree. Absolutely. I mean, we have to keep replacing these mature trees. We have to find space for big trees, overstory trees, as we're losing mature trees. Everybody wants to replace everything with a red bud, but we don't need a world full of red buds.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any other questions through the chat, Christy.
Okay. Well, then I'm done.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this. We learned a lot for sure. All right. I have a question here.
Okay.
How can we contact you for a consultation?
Oh, well, you can jot down my number, or my email is on this PowerPoint, and you can also look me up under the website speakingfortrees.com. I'm on Facebook, Speaking for Trees on Facebook, or I can give you my number right now. It's 770-823-5374.
567. Oh,
No, 770-823-5374.
well, thank you everybody for joining us. We'll keep doing these virtual classes during this time. And thank you, Christy, for your time. We appreciate it a lot, and have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Very
Y'all are welcome. Have a great day.